Once again, sorry for being late, and thank you very much for the invitation.
No, it's our pleasure. So a short introduction. So welcome to our discussion, Democracy Crisis in Poland. My name is Donatas Murauskas. I'm assistant professor at Vilnius University Law Faculty. And this meeting is part of our course, Protection of Human Rights in Practice. We also have our great LLM students of Vilnius University Law Faculty. And today we're meeting with Wojciech Teisės, who is assistant professor at Department of Theory of Law at Krakow University in Poland. And his scientific interests include political philosophy, ethics, philosophy of law, and he is interested in issues such as theory of political legitimacy, the concept of democracy. And I'm so glad to see you here, Mr. Teisės. Thank you for accepting really my invitation. Really.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
You didn't imagine to grab a coffee. I think you were in a rush. So, but still, I think we will have a great time. So the idea of our meeting is that I will give you a few questions related to democracy crisis in Poland, and then we will have Q&A session with the students asking whatever they want to ask, except maybe very very personal questions. But anything related to the question that we're actually trying to discuss right now. So let us begin with maybe some roots of all the issues we're discussing right now. Some experts would say that the process of change in Poland that we're discussing started with an attack of independence of a constitutional court by the political party Law and Justice. And could you tell us what was the major reason that the political party Law and Justice actually was so interesting in having majority of judges in the constitutional court? Have there been any signs even before everything started that there will be some issues related to constitutional changes?
Thank you for this question. It's a question which is discussed in Polish political science, maybe more than in legal sciences, but I think it might be helpful to start with a differentiation between direct cause of the crisis, of the current crisis, and its wider context. So starting with the direct cause issue, that is, by this I mean events that finally led to the current constitutional crisis. Maybe a very, very short introduction to Polish constitutional law could be helpful here. In Poland, we have a constitutional tribunal, which is a separate judicial institution with the power of constitutional review of legislation. And this constitutional court consists of 15 judges who are appointed for the term of 9 years. And they are elected by Sejm, which is Polish lower house of parliament, and then formally appointed by president. So 15 judges, 9 years, elected by Sejm and appointed by the president. And finally, this is the last important information, is that the terms of particular judges ends at different moments, and new judges are appointed for empty seats, the same as, for example, in American Supreme Court. That's nothing special about that, but for explaining the direct cause of the crisis, this might be important, because the constitutional crisis in Poland started in 2015, which was the year of presidential elections and parliamentary elections in Poland, which were both won by the ruling party, the party which rules at the moment, which is now in power, that is Law and Justice Party, the right-wing party, let's say. And at the same time, in 2015, 5 of 15 seats in the Constitutional Tribunal were to be replaced. So in 2015, there was an end of the term of 5 of 15 judges at the Constitutional Tribunal. So 3 of these judges, of these 5 judges, should be nominated by the old Sejm before elections, and 2 of them were to be nominated by the new one, so after the elections. However, despite this fact, the old Sejm, so before elections, decided to nominate all 5 judges for all 5 seats. And these 5 judges elected by the old Sejm were not appointed, any of them was not appointed by the president. Which the new president after elections, and after parliamentary elections, the Law and Justice, these elections won by Law and Justice, they nominated a different set of 5 judges.
Mm-hmm.
And they were elected immediately after the elections, and even faster, they were appointed at the same night. They were appointed by the Polish president. So the Constitutional Tribunal, considering this complicated issue, issued a judgment which confirmed that 3 of those judges, that 3 judges should be nominated by the old parliament, and only 2 should be nominated by the new one. However, in response, a new parliament passed a legislation, a law, which forced the inclusion of these 5 new nominees. So there was the battle concerning this 5 judges, and it is a great source of all problems with Polish constitutional crisis, because the ruling party finally succeeded to place all new nominees. So the current situation is that 3 of 15 judges are not recognized as legitimate judges by half of the society, by majority of lawyers, and by the parliamentary opposition.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is in short, this is the direct cause of the current crisis, because as you may imagine, it has some further consequences for not recognizing certain judgment issued by the Constitutional Tribunal, and so on and so on. Now, but your question, I guess that your question refers also to the wider context of this problem, and I would say that the issue of Constitutional Tribunal, and maybe more broadly, the constitutional order, was not a topic in the political campaign of 2015. It was not discussed at all. So what happened after the elections was a surprise to, I guess, almost everybody. However, when you look back to longer some previous stages of Polish history, you may recognize certain signs that may have suggested this anti-constitutional changes. I guess that I can think of about 3 such factors, and one is historical. So the important factor that caused, I guess that it is an important factor that caused the crisis, is that the ruling party, Law and Justice, is an anti-communist party, which somehow contested the legitimacy of Polish constitutional order for many years before 2015. However, according to the narrative, Polish constitution from 1997 is somehow it's not illegal, but it's illegitimate because it is based on a political compromise between anti-communist and post-communist. So post-communists, according to their narrative, post-communists should not influence the constitutional order at all. And however, this political narrative for many years supported the claim that we need a new constitution. So Law and Justice is going to win the constitutional majority and they will introduce their own constitution. However, after the crisis started in 2015, the same narrative was somehow used to justify not conforming to constitutional law by the ruling party. So to undermine the very essence of the constitutional order. Yes, it was not said that it is. It was said that it is so illegitimate that we don't have to obey it. Mm. So I guess that it is one important factor. The second one is maybe less historical and more social. In Poland, we are facing very great level of political polarization since, I would say, 2007, 2005, something like that. Is polarization between right wing and between conservatives and liberals, let's say. So one is the strongest force of the right side is Law and Justice, and the strongest force of the liberal side is Civic Platform. That's the name of the party which ruled before Law and Justice. And I would say I was not so far ago, I was reading a book by Robert Teisės. He's a political philosopher from Harvard, I guess, and he wrote a book on polarization where he introduced 3 different levels of polarization. So according to him, polarizations, the term polarization in politics covers platform polarization, so which concerns official doctrines of political actors. Secondly, partisan polarization, which refers to attitudes of party members and politicians, how they treat each other. And the third level is popular polarization, so it concerns attitudes of ordinary citizens. That is, that citizens see each other as political enemies. And I guess that in Polish political context, the level of all these 3 spheres of political polarization is very, very high. It was very, very high in 2015. And in such circumstances, it was very simple to explain to people that all, even neutral institutions and public officials are in fact partisans. They are in fact friends or foes. And Constitutional Tribunal was declared to be a foe of the ruling party. Yeah, so I guess that this fact of political polarization somehow provided a ground for what happened then. And finally, I guess that it is also important to note that the international context also played some role. I think that Poland, with its democracy crisis and constitutional crisis, is not a lonely island on the ocean of international democracy or state constitutional democracies. Definitely Viktor Orban in Hungary and Recep Erdogan in Turkey provided some role models for Jarosław Kaczyński, who is the leader of the Law and Justice Party. In particular, there was even, I would say, widespread fascination on the right side of political scene with Orban's Hungary. Even Kaczynski once said that his political aim is to establish Budapest in Warsaw. So it was of course it was just a rhetoric, political rhetoric, because it referred to this widespread acclamation for Orban's actions. But yeah, when you look at it from today, when you think about it from today's perspective, it's also maybe important that not just somehow internal causes and internal factors, but also some external factors had some influence on the situation.
Yeah, this is so interesting. We started with this unexpected change in the constitutional order by appointing the judges in the way that you described. But we do not call this process as some judiciary crisis in Poland. We call it like democracy crisis. Is it something? Is it something about something more than judiciary? Are there any examples related to some other elements of democracy here?
I guess that's the answer to your question. Of course, depends heavily on the issue what is meant by democracy or constitutional democracy, and what is meant by the phenomenon of democracy backsliding, which is commonly used with respect to Poland, among others, to Poland constitutional situation. It will be maybe a very simplistic picture, but I would say that one may define the idea of liberal democracy. This is how I introduce this idea to my students. I do it by saying that liberal democracy invokes three essential components. In particular, the electoral component, that is the principle of free elections with the universal suffrage, or one person, one vote principle. Secondly, the liberal component, that is every liberal democracy has some broader or more narrower set of basic rights, and there are some rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of association, equality before the law, which are essential to each set of basic rights. And thirdly, I would say that there is also some, let's say, legal component or institutional component. So there are specific institutions which secure, which safeguard these basic principles of liberal democracy. And I guess that during the contemporary crisis, both the second and third component has been significantly weakened. So both the legal component, so as you said, the most paradigmatic example is what happens to the judiciary, to constitutional tribunal, which is totally politically subordinated by the governing party. At the moment, a governing party nominated its members to constitutional tribunal, and it reformed, also introduced some reforms of the wider judiciary, including disciplinary procedure, which is very tough for judges, for standard judges, not constitutional judges. However, regarding the second component, that is this set of basic rights, I guess that one may worry about several rights or freedoms that are currently under threat. And let me point to just two examples. I think that one good example is the right to privacy. Certain in 2016, as far as I remember, certain very intrusive measures, investigative measures were introduced. So police and socials and security got new tools for surveillance and so on and so on. This new law on police, the new law on police does not contain a requirement of obtaining prior approval from an independent institution to obtaining some private data. This is just one example, but I guess that you understand the direction and the essence of the problem, and it makes very difficult, if not impossible, for people to find out whether they are being unlawfully spied or abused of surveillance powers and so on. And we have unfortunately we have evidence that such things happen from time to time, that there are politicians or judges who were spied. They didn't know about that. Their data were somehow obtained illegitimately, and so I guess that this is a problem. I think, Donatas, that you may be familiar with the problem because the newest European Court of Human Rights judgments in Hungarian cases, and I think that also Russian cases, they concerned quite similar laws that are currently valid in Polish context. And maybe one more example concerning the second component, the basic rights component of liberal democracy, and it's freedom of press, of media, and maybe more broadly free speech principle. So maybe just one example concerning this sphere. In Poland, we have I don't know how it is in Lithuania, but I guess that it may be quite similar. So we have public media and private media, and public media has been taken over just after the elections, and from that time they carry political propaganda, as is typical for Eastern regimes, and for Russia and so on. But it is only half of the problem, because the ruling party would like also to take over private media by different means. The biggest private television, which is independent, this television company, which is independent, was 2 years ago was threatened with not prolonging the license, the concession for the possibility of existence of this television. It was finally prolonged by the government. However, it happened after the intervention of the United States government, because this private television is owned by the Discovery Group, and it was an international issue. And in fact, it was the strongest reason why they why it still works, why it still carries The other strategy of the government is to buy and become the owner of private media and to make them very similar to public ones. This is what happened not so long ago to one of the biggest Polish newspapers, which was bought by some state-owned business company, by Orlen. I think you, of course, you know. So Orlen is also a media group now in Poland. They have money to buy such things, and it was used in this particular context. And this also, just as all public media, it is also full of right-wing propaganda. Yeah, so I guess that these are these two things that I find important. And one may ask, considering what I've said, just at whether Poland is still a democracy or not. And so the question, of course, as I said, the question is how we understand democracy. Definitely, I would say that we are not a liberal democracy in the sense that we've got all these three components rightly introduced rightly established. So if we are a democracy, we are a democracy in a very minimal sense. Maybe I don't know if you are familiar, but there's very popular in political philosophy conception of minimal democracy, which was formulated by Josef Schumpeter, an Austrian economist. Yeah, and Schumpeter thinks of democracy as just a method of selecting government, selecting rulers who will rule. So different political systems differ in the way they legitimizes who rules. And what's characteristic, according to Schumpeter, for democracy is that democracy somehow legitimizes rulers, legitimizes authorities by free elections. So if we come back to my three component definition of liberal democracy, Schumpeter said that only this first component is enough for saying that we have democracy. Yeah, so it's interesting, and I don't know whether it is persuasive or not, but it's interesting theory that there is no necessary catalog of basic liberties. There is no need to introduce any specific institutions for democracy. There is even no need to recognize proportional representation in the parliament, according to Schumpeter. So this is a kind of the winner takes it all democracy. And it is, I think that if we are a democracy, now we are only democracy in such minimal electoral sense.
Wow, so interesting. That's an interesting thought. And then when I was listening to you, well, it was so interesting to hear about this external pressure related to buying the private company, and not buying, but not giving a license. So we're talking about some external measures that would affect a little bit the government. And we usually, when we talk about crisis, like democracy crisis or rule of law crisis in Poland, we hear about some external sources that are pressuring European Commission, then we have court judgments. What would be your considerations about the weakness of democracy itself, capable of defending itself? Like, why don't the internal domestic constitutional framework is not sufficient to safeguard such backslide of democracy internally? Why do we need the external pressure?
Yeah, I guess it's great question, and I think that nobody has a good answer at the moment. But as far as I know, many work is done to provide an account of what's the problem with democracy, why it's so weak. So maybe I think that the proper answer to your question depends on the account of some conception of explanation of what cost what has cost the current crisis. And the problem is that there are many different conceptions of this kind. Maybe let me just point to the most popular. So one very popular contemporary conception of the problem with democracy, the current problem, the current cause of the factors that caused current democracy crisis, is saying that the crisis it's a very simple way of putting it, but it boils down to saying that the democracy crisis is a result of wrongs committed by political leaders or political elites. Yeah, so there's a very influential book, How Democracies Die. This is very popular. It was translated to Polish by Lewicki and Ziblatt, and they say that what happened, that of course that it's not about Polish constitutional crisis, but the crisis in the US. But they say that the main problem is change in the attitude of political elites. This change manifests in rejecting democratic rules of the game, denying the legitimacy of political opponents, tolerating violence also, and somehow violating, curtailing civil liberties of the opponents. And they say, and this I think that somehow applies to Polish context, that we are currently witnessing the erosion of democratic institutions, which is the title dying of democracy. They say famously that democracies do not collapse as a result of a coup, a military coup, but more often they die in consequence of the actions of political leaders. Why is that? Because it is an interesting thought that they see that the key mechanism protecting democracy is that political elites, especially parties, they perform in well-functioning democracy. They perform very special role that is required by the democratic system. That is, they are a filter, a gatekeeper for undemocratic forces. Yeah, so in each society there are, I don't know, let's say 10, 12, 20% of undemocratic forces, and responsible political parties, responsible political leaders keep these forces away from the political process. And the problem is that what happened in the United States, as they argue, and what happened in Poland is that some kind of alliance with, between democratic forces and undemocratic forces, which has some awful consequences. So another conception, which goes totally different direction, I would say, is that the crisis is caused not by political elites, but by unreasonable political decisions taken by the electorate. So not politicians, but the people are the problem here. Why they are the problem? Because they are ignorant about political process. Very straightforward also conception, but there is some intuition behind it, I have to say. So typically, this problem of widespread ignorance of the electorate is explained by so-called it is called rational ignorance thesis. The issue here is that being ignorant about politics is a rational attitude for most citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we are not ignorant because we are bad people or stupid people. We are ignorant because we are rational. Why is that? Because if we put on the one hand, if we see on the one hand that learning about politics, so making smart choices, it's very demanding, very time consuming, and very sometimes unpleasant activity to follow what happens in political sphere. And on the other hand, if we looked at chances of influencing the outcome of election, that a particular vote will influence the election, that my voice have any significance, yeah, we'll see that it's not worth taking. So all this work to be done to make a smart choice is not worth doing it. And that's why it's rational. Yeah. An average vote, the problem is that the same calculation applies to every voter. So if average voter has very little incentive to become a competent voter. And this explains why the electorate has a tendency to make rather bad decisions than good decisions. And it's easy to manipulate for political parties and so on and so on. So maybe another popular theory, I would say, which also applies to Poland to some extent, is referring to populism. That the current democratic crisis, not only in Poland but in different places in the world, can be explained by growing popularity of populism. Of course, populism is a very tricky term without commonly agreed meaning. Traditionally, it was associated with the view that recognizes society as separated into two camps. So there are people and there is some elite, and the political process is should express the will of the people and not the elites. However, as in contemporary literature, we can find some different definitions of populism. And for example, Jan Werner Müller, it's a very important and influential work on populism. In fact, he defines populism by, so firstly, maybe he sees populism as the ideology, special ideology, which is in its essence anti-democratic. Why it is anti-democratic? Because it is based on the rejection of pluralism, on the stigmatizing the political opponent, and on the lack, and this is particularly damaging, on the lack of respect for democratic institutions. So if the will of parliament do not cohere with the will of the people, so we have a reason not to follow the will of the parliament. And this is totally anti-democratic. This is very devastating for democracy. So here the explanation is that this growing popularity of such ideas, of such family of ideas, undermines the very fundament, very grounds of constitutional democracy. And maybe do we have time still? But no, I'm afraid.
No. We have. We'll prolong it a little bit. Sure. Yeah. Just
yeah. If I may, so this is the last one. which I would think about is very also popularized in Polish context. It was formulated in its contemporary form, in its newest form, by Adam Przeworski, who is a very well-known, famous Polish political scientist, and it points to social inequality. And the idea is that the contemporary crisis is somehow a result of unequal welfare distribution. This conception is a bit different from the previous one, because it assumes that there is some internal tension between democracy and capitalism in this very essence. Why is that? It's famously formulated by Marx, because in capitalism, the power belongs to the minority, and in democracy, the power belongs to the majority. Yeah, so they do not go well together, because the majority can destroy the minority by political process. This is the risk. However, as Przeworski in his book pointed out, despite this fact, this internal tension between two components of each liberal democracy, for many years, this combination has coexisted peacefully. And he argues that there is something which happened not so far ago, because there was, according to him, a kind of social compromise between employees, employers, workers, and so on. And this compromise contemporary is no longer binding. So differences in income are growing. Left-wing parties do not fulfill their historical and ideological role. There are problems with the economic growth has slowed down, and all inequalities have risen significantly. So in these circumstances, it is, according to Przeworski, it is not surprising that the underprivileged classes, the disadvantaged classes, question the legitimacy of the order, broadly understood order, which is established by the privileged. So one can say that on this account, democracy was sitting on a bomb for a long time, and this bomb exploded in some places last years.
So fascinating to listen to you, to those that you refer to those theories in a really practical context, and it seems very pessimistic in terms of institutional level. But my last question before opening Q&A would be related to the role of individuals in trying to defend democracy in Poland, because even though it seems that institutionally it is quite difficult to achieve something, we have cases at the European Court of Human Rights in some different contexts when particular persons, they still apply, they have this belief. Would you consider somehow the role of individual lawyers or activists in this political crisis, legal crisis important, or this is just some fragments that will not affect much?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I guess that we can think of about three role models, lawyers who are role models of defending democracy. They definitely play significant role in the current war because the main field of the war is of course our reforms in the judicial system. So the first group of these role models, I would say, are judges who protest against judicial reforms. They're very strong as a group because it's easy to take over judges, so all the seats in constitutional tribunal, because you need only 15 subordinated persons, subordinated lawyers. But we have I don't know, 15,000 of judges in Polish judicial system, and it's not so easy to replace them. And they manifest that they do not agree with violating judicial independence and so on and so on. And there were different ways of protesting. Of course, some of them gave interviews to television. There was a moment when, as an act of protest, was seen issuing a preliminary question to European Court of Justice. So different judges were initiated disciplinary proceedings for doing so, as a sanction for issuing such a question. This question, of course, concerned the fact whether this judge is legitimate or not, because he was nominated by the new power, by the body, governmental body, which nominates judges at this moment. So this is the first group I would think immediately. The most important, I guess, because they have a power of uniting people among them. They're very, very important persona in Polish political sphere, these judges. So second group, which I think about, are, let's say, legal activists. So some lawyers, practitioners, legal advisors, barristers, and so on, who try to make some contribution to defend democracy, and they can do it. They do it by different ways. Firstly, they initiate legal proceedings, both domestic and international. Those proceedings that are currently in the European Court of Human Rights are initiated by let's say, legal activists. So I'm not sure whether it's the best label, but I think you know what I mean. Secondly, they provide some legal support to people who were arrested or charged during, for example, anti-governmental protests. Yeah, because we have there was 2 years, I guess 2 years ago, there was an important judgment by this new constitutional tribunal, which reformed Polish law on abortion. It eliminated one possibility of getting legal abortion, and there were protests after the judgment, protests which contested the legitimacy of the judgment. And these protests were happening during the COVID pandemic. So the government issued a law that banned any protest during the pandemic. So it's impossible to protest during the pandemic, but people, of course, gathered, and many were arrested and charged. These legal activists, legal practitioners help these people in such situations. So this is an example. And finally, I guess that this group of legal activists also closely collaborate with political parties. They are support in legal issues for opposition parties who try to discuss with the ruling party. So first judges, second legal activists, and third group of lawyers who are engaged in this war are, let's say, legal experts, or maybe people working in the academia, legal scholars, and so on. I guess this is also an important role. So as you may, I think that you see from my introduction that the issue is quite complicated. It's not so easy understandable by an average voter, who is, as I said, probably an ignorant voter at the same time. So the explaining the causes of the crisis, the status of different, the legitimacy of different acts, the fact that some judgments are legitimate because there were no illegitimate judges in this particular court, and other are not legitimate, and so on and so on. This is quite complicated, and these people. Some very good work engaging in the process and neutrally, rationally explaining these problems to the public in media, in academic journals, also conferences, and so on and so on.
Very fascinating. Not fascinating for Poland, but fascinating for us to hear. So I would like to open the floor for the students. So if we have a few questions, would be great. I guess if you would like to, so then maybe just raise your hands, and then I will try to do for the last 15 minutes to give a floor for, I think 5 maybe. So I already have Bogdan, Mariam, Alexander, and Kirill, and Anya. Okay, so. Okay, so maybe Bogdan, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for interesting explanation. The internal kitchen, what do we have now in Poland? And I have a very broad question, but maybe you have a good and direct answer. How do you feel how the war in Ukraine affected to this so-called democracy or legal crisis in Poland, or does it have no effect at all because it's just internal business of the Poland, or maybe some of politicians or ruling party trying to use this crucial Poland help and assistance to Ukraine and to Ukrainian society in this war, just to have it in their account. And yeah, by the way, I should start it from that. Thanks to Poland for all what you are doing for us and for Ukraine and Ukrainians who live in any part of the Poland. Yeah, thanks.
Should I answer after the question, or we'll gather some more?
Yeah. I think you can just directly answer. Yeah.
So firstly, thank you very much for a nice word, and nice to hear from Ukraine. It's a complicated question in the sense that my broader opinion, I have to gather some thoughts to have a broader opinion on that topic. Definitely, the war on Ukraine. So our attitude regarding war in Ukraine was not let's say object of disagreement. So everybody agrees that we have to help Ukraine as much as it is possible. But I cannot cannot. I don't have any good examples of good legal examples where the government tried to use the war to change Polish legal system. Definitely, there are. It is important they use it in a political context. So to prepare adequate message. So because everybody a year ago, because everybody was talking about war in Ukraine, nobody was talking about reforms of the judiciary. This was not important. That's a secondary topic, and definitely it was something desirable from the point of view of the government, but that's the only thing that comes to my mind at the moment.
Thank you, Mariam. Mariam, could you?
Yeah, I actually have two questions. Firstly, when you were talking about the most important challenges of democracy right now, you have mentioned right to privacy in terms of data protection and journalism, right to free speech in terms of journalism. And I'm curious, whether do you think that the current regulation about abortion is problematic in today's Poland in terms of democratic society? Because Poland has one of the most restrictive abortion regulations in the entire United European Union. And what do you think, how it affects on democratic problems right now? And about the second question, I'm interested whether you think that protection of minorities' rights is a criteria for the democracy, because otherwise how you would differentiate democracy from the ochlocracy, who is the majoritarianism and who is the just ruling of masses. If you just are concerned about the election and expression of majorities ideas and majorities opinions, how we should differentiate democracy from the ochlocracy?
Okay, so thanks. I would say that both questions are quite difficult. So regarding the first one, whether democracy needs necessarily a particular law on abortion, I do not think that any particular law on abortion is necessary to call a system democratic or not. So I think that that abortion should be available, and this is this desirable regulation, but I don't think that Polish regulation makes Poland non-democracy from being a democracy with the previous law on abortion. That's a short answer, but I can elaborate on that if you wish. The second question, yes, I totally agree with the remark that if we restrict democracy, as Schumpeter does, only to the electoral component with the majoritarian rule, then one can ask whether it is still democracy or not. And on other accounts of democracy, other than Schumpeter's, it would not be a democracy at all. So, for example, if we take Ronald Dworkin's conception of liberal democracy, then it's not enough. Polish democracy is not a democracy, constitutional democracy. That's the term Dworkin used most frequently. Secondly, if we take, for example, Philip Petit's conception of republican democracy, it's also not enough. Petit's conception of democracy is based on a very particular understanding of freedom. and Poland is not democracy, according to Petit. Finally, if we take, for example, Jürgen Habermas's conception of deliberative democracy, definitely Poland is not a democracy in this sense. So it's depends on your categorization, whether you introduce ochlocracy or whether you say that it's democracy in minimal terms. So it depends on the framework which you provide for discussing these issues. I think it's not so. The framework is not so important whether we call it ochlocracy or minimal democracy. In Schumpeter's terms, we've got in both situations good reasons to criticize this political system.
Thank you. Alexander.
Yes, hello. Thank you for this really interesting lecture on the topic of democracy and its crisis. Firstly, I wanted to ask you the same question as Bogdan did, but then I came up with another question. What do you think of creating a global law and its unification by mixing a lot of countries? Like we have a EU today, it works quite well. And don't you think it will help to strengthen the global democratization of world? And it will like be a kind of tool that will be used to create unique and good law system that will fight undemocratic rulings and rules.
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yeah, I think that this kind of the role of international bodies and international law is fundamental in protecting state democracies. So I'm, if I may, I think of myself as a Democrat in Republican way, the new Republican way, by which you may find in text by Philip Petit, who is an Australian legal philosopher and political philosopher. And as I said, the idea, as I said, answering the previous question, the idea of Petit is to build democracy on the idea of freedom. So democracy is a political system that realizes freedom in Republican sense. So freedom in Republican sense, I don't want to talk too long about this issue, but generally speaking, the idea of Republican freedom is the aim of Republican freedom is to eliminate any domination in society. So he said that he comes with some intuition that the being subordinated to arbitrary power, both in political context. So when majority can subordinate minority, a tyrant can subordinate his people, and both in private context. So when employer can subordinate its workers, they are somehow, they have, he or she has arbitrary power over them, can fire them at will, and so on and so on. So this makes, so being so if somebody has this kind of power, this dominating power, then somebody who is subordinated is not free. And the aim of Republican political system, Republican democracy, is to eliminate in any context this relation of domination and which causes unfreedom. And what is the way of doing so? So Petit says that the good way of doing so, one strategy of doing so, an important policy that helps achieving the same is to separate powers. So there should be no institution that has power which could dominate anybody. And he thinks that it is not enough that we separate powers between legislation, execution, and judiciary. Should go further. So there should be there should be the separation between local power and central power, and also between state power and international power. So we are, long story short, we are more free and we are a better democracy if we are somehow secured also by international institutions, international bodies. Yeah, so I hope that it is at least a bit clear.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Very,
it was clear.
Yeah, but I recommend a text by Philip Petit. If you are interested, you can write me an email. It's a very illuminating conception, I would say.
Considering our time limits, I think, and elaborated answers you provide, I guess I would like to give the last question to maybe Kirill, and then we will round up. Okay, Kirill, please.
Okay, I have a kind of common question, and would like to know your personal opinion. So my question is, what steps should be made in order to improve democracy situation in Poland, maybe in internal affairs or etc. And who will have the leading role in this process, to your mind?
Sorry, but there was some problem. I didn't hear the last sentence.
Okay, who will have the leading role in this process?
Oh, okay. So that's the difficult question.
Also, if you can add some information about what role can European Union play in these problems, but not just express their anger and emotions, because in most of the cases we know that the only thing what European Union is doing is express their emotions about undemocratic things in other countries. So this question is somehow connected to Kirill's question. So if you just can some information about role of European Union in this, what can they do in other countries in European Union?
Yeah, I can elaborate on the. So maybe I will start. So with the more general picture, but I promise it will be short. So I guess that considering the current crisis, which is not only a Polish problem, but different places, different states all over the world has problems with democracy, I guess that there are, at least in the literature I'm familiar with, there are three possible strategies of dealing with the problem. So one is rejection strategy. So there are theorists or scholars who says that if there are so big problems with liberal democracy, especially if there are problems internal, if the cause is internal to democracy, as the social inequality idea says, or political ignorance theory says, then maybe it's a good idea to replace liberal democracy with some better political regime, and we should think about it. And there are some ideas of epistocracy and plutocracy, but I would not elaborate on that. The second approach, the second strategy, is to reform democracy. Yeah, to say that we can improve somehow liberal democracy by implementing institutional reforms that some proper response to the contemporary crisis can be found and formulated within the democratic framework. And the final strategy, which I think is bit separate from the second one, is that strategy which recommends to improve liberal democracy by protecting its fundamental values and institutions. By protecting, I mean that providing mechanism against different threats, in particular against political enemies. So doing this with criminal sanctions and things like that. So there are people who say, coming to Polish context, that the best response to the current crisis is to put in jail all people responsible for the previous crisis. Yeah, but it is an issue of discussion. Not everybody agree with that. And yeah, so considering that, I'm not sure which strategy is the best now, which is the most legitimate, and how it thinks what will happen in Polish context is even a more difficult question. I guess that everything would be easy if current opposition will win the next elections, which will happen in this autumn, in the fall. So if they win a constitutional majority, they can prepare a new constitution, and we will start with this from 0 point, and they can change the constitutional tribunal and so on and so on, because if they will not win the constitutional majority, it will be much more difficult to change to reform the reforms which were passed by the Law and Justice. And finally, considering the European Union, definitely European Union is an important actor in this context. Pressure from the European Union, I guess, it helped a lot to Polish opposition, the legal side of the scene. But and I think that engagement from the European Union is morally justified and even more morally desirable, but it's politically problematic because the propaganda of the current ruling party is that it is they show European Union as external forces that try to influence our affairs, and it is in this sense an illegitimate way of doing things. So yeah, I'm not sure whether I answer your question, but I did my best.
Oh yes. I'm glad that we're finishing with on a note, talking about some prospects. So it kind of rightly frames our talk, and it was fascinating. Thank you so much, Wojtek, for being
once again. I'm very sorry for being late.
Yeah, but it is my error, like, because I also needed really to check this out several times additionally, and at the same time it was very illuminating. We learned, I think, a lot. Thank you for this. Thank you to students for really great questions. Yeah, really I appreciate it, and your engagement. And let's go to reflect, and I wish you all the great remaining day and a great start of the week. So with the students, we'll meet tomorrow already. With you, Wojtek, we'll meet someday later. Thank you again.
Hope so. Yeah. Thank you very much. It was very nice to be with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. Goodbye.
Bye.